Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
Worlds Beyond and the Spaces Between by Curtiss Christensen. Professor Victor Fern, I presume? Asked the rotund man as he shook my hand. Indeed I am. You must be Matthias Stuttler. The university informed me of your curious discovery in Moleculon. He handed me a heavy lead-lined case. I sat it on the table and unclasped the seal. Stop! He shouted and grabbed my hands. We don't know the effects of exposure to this artifact. One of my interns is already in a body bag. I would hate for the foremost authority on ancient technology to suffer the same fate. I removed his hands and turned to him. Perhaps you ought to explain the circumstance surrounding this object. I have unraveled the mysteries of many machines that contradict established academic notions of human progression, but never have I dealt with a device that could instantaneously obliterate the life of a human being. Dr. Stuttler recounted his bizarre tale. He had been excavating a vast ancient building. It seemed a temple of some sort, given the elaborate carvings of alien gods and its odd asymmetric construction. The walls were covered in a unique language which the team could not translate. It varied vastly from the Sumerian dialect found throughout the rest of the ruins and appeared to have no comprehensible pattern. In a central room was a table or altar of stone. Stuttler swore upon his life that the circular object was absent on his first examination of the altar. Allegedly, the sphere appeared in an indentation overnight. No one noticed its sudden appearance, and none could explain. An intern tried to grab it and was struck dead immediately. The archaeology team, fully garbed in protective gear, managed to remove it with a long pair of iron blacksmithing tongs. Throughout his telling, I felt the excitement of scientific curiosity melt into uncharacteristic dread and foreboding. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling of impending doom. What of the intern now? Have you had an autopsy performed? I asked after he finished his story. Yes, but the results were inconclusive. The report stated that there was no indication of what killed the man. They said that he was in near perfect health. It is almost as though he willed himself into death. I said, frowning from contemplation. Most troubling. Rest assured, Doctor, that I will take the utmost precaution while examining this object. Please do, Victor. I await a report on your findings. He left and I got to work. I procured for myself a hazmat suit and carefully removed the sphere from its box within the confines of an isolated, controlled laboratory. Even through the thick gloves, I could feel the icy chill of the metal. Some ineffable sensation flitted around the edges of my being. It was not a feeling in the traditional sense, more like a faraway echo of one, almost like being able to feel the warmth of sunlight from within a dark room. The closest description I could give for this was the supposition of a sixth sense. I placed the sphere atop a plastic cylinder in a glass enclosure. Under the cube was a spectrograph that emitted electromagnetic radiation. I ran the machine through the spectrum. Something incredible happened. Gamma rays produced no effect, but X-rays caused the vacuum around the metal sphere to ignite in shimmering sparkles. When exposed to ultraviolet, the sparkles became fluctuating tendrils of pale green. They emanated from the sphere in a radius that extended a few feet beyond the glass. The urge to submerge myself in this aurora was nearly irresistible. An alarm clock buzzed incessantly, drawing my attention away from the artifact. I saw that the time was nearly 8 in the morning. I had been staring at the object the entire night. I turned the spectrograph off and hurried out of the lab to remove the hazmat suit. I gathered my notes from the office and ran to the auditorium. The students were already seated, waiting for my arrival. The wall clock indicated that I was a few minutes late. I placed my notes on the lectern and began my lecture. It is the hubris of man to assume that progression is a steady upward movement. In our arrogance, we assume that scientific and technologic knowledge has reached heights never before achieved in history. This is simply not the case. The more we unearth the ruins of ancient civilizations, the more we learn just how advanced they were. The pyramids at Giza, Machu Picchu, Kai-Alud, all defy traditional explanation. The evidence is there, despite academic denial. I have discovered computing systems predating our own by thousands of years, vast systems of pumped water rivaling those of today, and the inklings of possible gravitational distortion machines. It is paramount that we rethink our preconceptions of ancient man, if only to avoid whatever catastrophe struck them from the face of history. Never constrain yourselves to the scientific dogma prevalent today. Free your minds to the possibilities. I began to transcribe a few of my notes on the board when the same sensation from before assaulted me, the sixth sense. It was more powerful this time, crashing over me like waves upon a sea cliff. The boundaries of my mind eroded, allowing the invasion of some writhing, pulsating energy. It was at the same time revolting and oddly pleasant. Regardless, I found myself incapable of resistance. I heard a voice inside my thoughts that didn't belong. "Touch. No fear," it said. It was guttural, almost like one gagging on their words. What? I thought. "The sphere. Let it. Paradise awaits. No fear. Here. Knowledge, understanding. Touch." "Professor Fern, are you all right?" The sensation retreated from my body. I opened my eyes to one of my female students standing over me. I found myself lying on the floor. "Professor Fern?" She furrowed her brow in concern. I slowly stood. "Class is dismissed," I said. There was fluid running from my nostril. I wiped it away and found blood on my fingers. "Should I call the nurse?" asked the student. "No, I'll be fine." "Okay. Is that going to be on the test?" she asked, pointing to the chalkboard. I turned and saw symbols scrawled over its entirety in a seemingly random pattern. "What?" I stared at the board. "No, I don't think it will." The class shuffled out and I ignored them, instead focusing on the indecipherable language that I had apparently written unconsciously. I took a picture with my cell phone and sent it to Dr. Stuttler. The phone rang almost immediately. "Hello? Professor Fern?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, still in a daze. "Where did you get this picture?" "I took it." "I get that, Victor. But who wrote these? Where did you find them?" "I did," on the chalkboard during one of my classes. The phone went silent. Matthias, are you still there? I am. This is most troubling. You must cease your examination of the object immediately. An intense, unwarranted rage struck me. What? Why? I am almost at a breakthrough here. You have no right. Get a hold of yourself, Fern. We can't risk it. I'm coming to get the object. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't risk. This could be the crowning achievement of my career, and I'll be damned if I let some two-bit archaeologist jumping at his own shadow get in my way. I pulled the phone away from my ear. Dr. Stuttler's voice still emanated quietly from the speaker. Victor, can't you see? The sphere is affecting your mind. I hung up on him and left the auditorium, anxious to continue work on the sphere before Matthias arrived to ruin my discoveries. I rushed into the lab, throwing the hazmat suit on as quickly as I could. For safety reasons, the lab door had no lock, so I barricaded it with a chair. The sphere sat within the glass case. Its dull gleam beckoned me forward. I heeded the call and walked over to the spectrograph. I felt warmth penetrate my being, spreading like a pleasurable flame burning inward from my skin. Give in, said the voice. I removed the sphere from the machine and held it close to my face. It was so perfectly round. My fingers numbed from the cold. I wondered what the sphere felt like to the touch, how smooth and bitterly frigid without the hindrance of these thick gloves. Touch, touch, touch. The voice and my own thoughts coalesced. I couldn't tell if they were the voices or mine. I placed the device on the counter and removed the hazmat gear. I jumped when I heard the doorknob rattle. The chair creaked in protest, but held out against the pressure of someone attempting to open the door. Fern, what are you doing? I turned to the door and saw the face of Dr. Stuttler staring at me through the crack. I ignored him and continued pulling the suit off myself. Stop this at once! You'll die! He slammed on the door harder. It would not budge. I let the hazmat suit fall to my ankles, and I stepped over it. The sphere sat like a precious gem in front of me. A sudden gripping fear seized me. I hesitated mid-stride, paralyzed by a gnawing primal anxiety. No fear. Let want, said the voice. I grappled internally against the unknown presence. Survival instincts took hold of my consciousness. Instinct, however, lost out, and the compulsion to grab it overwhelmed my growing apprehension. I took the last step toward the counter and cupped the sphere in both hands. The cold was gone. Its temperature matched that of my skin, feeling less like an object and more an extension of my body. I found that the surface was not smooth at all. It was coarse, almost sharp. Thin cuts formed on my fingers as I ran them over the curvature. The wounds bled a dark red that the sphere absorbed like a dry sponge. A final slam shook the door. The chair cracked and fell to the floor in a broken heap. Matthias pushed the door as wide as it would go and tried to squeeze his girth through the opening. Victor, what have you done? He gasped, peering around the door. I clasped the sphere to my chest and winced as new gashes opened up on the palms of my hands. As I did so, I felt a previously hidden indentation in the object. Stuttler managed to press his way through the door. He ran across the room and tried to pry my arms open. I resisted with all my strength. Put it down, Victor! Let go! Push the gap, Do. Dr. Matthias knocked me to the ground. I extended my arm as far away from him as I could. He squirmed over my body in an attempt to reach the sphere. I pushed him away with my free arm and pressed my index finger into the indentation. Yes, yes, said the voice. A needled protrusion sprang from the sphere and stabbed through the tip of my finger. I tried to drop the device to no avail. I felt the spike wind its way swiftly through the length of my finger and into my hand, then my arm. I screamed in pain. There was a pinching sensation as the needle stopped just before my elbow. I looked at my arm and saw the flesh was draining of its color, turning white as blood flowed up the tube and into the sphere. I stopped resisting Stuttler. He scrambled toward the sphere stuck to my hand. As his face neared mine, I weakly muttered, "Help!" He swatted at the sphere, but it remained planted firmly. "Fern, drop it!" "I'm trying," I said in the same hushed tone. My body contorted in spasms. Light started to flood the lab. I managed to look at the sphere. It glowed brighter and brighter. I saw the bones in my fingers illuminated through the skin and muscle. I closed my eyes when the brightness became unbearable. I saw the blood vessels in my eyelids. My body twisted into physically impossible forms. The light faded to absolute black. My entire being stretched to lengths far exceeding the confines of the laboratory. Immeasurable agony racked my being. I smeared across the cosmos, and a void of utter darkness consumed me. And in a fraction of an instant, everything in my body condensed back into its proper place. The needle in my arm retreated into the sphere. I felt weightless. I opened my eyes to find that I was suspended in a dark green viscous fluid. I panicked, desperately trying to hold my breath and flailing wildly in an attempt to swim to air. My arms moved sluggishly through the thick soup in vain. Adequately swift propulsion proved impossible. Even if I possessed the capability of pushing myself through the goop, the darkness and lack of gravity prevented me from knowing which way was up. My lungs protested until I could stand no more. I exhaled and took a breath. My head spun with dizziness, and the sludge oozed over my tongue. It was surprisingly sweet and altogether not an unpleasant sensation. My airway filled, and I prepared myself for suffocation. Death did not come. My head cleared, and I took in another breath of the slime. Apparently, this liquid oxygenated in a way that my human lungs could process. I labored from the task, but calmed down and managed to breathe effectively. I noticed that the fluid turned brown upon my exhalation, and then slowly shifted back to dark green. Where the hell am I? I thought, examining my surroundings. Haze obscured my view, but I could just make out Matthias floating in front of me. I tried to speak. "Matthias, it's okay to breathe," I said. The words vibrated and jiggled through the jelly. I heard myself in an odd, muffled way. The vibrations transferred from the fluid to my skin, almost like hearing through your bones. Delay punctuated the archaeologist's response. He shrieked. "Knock it off!" I yelled. The words drifted to him, and I saw his mouth clamp shut. The screaming ceased a few moments later. "We have to find a way back. Try to get over to me," I said. I felt the sphere still clasped in my fist. "Okay." His answer drifted through the jelly to me. I tried to move again, this time with deliberate, controlled movements. It worked, but progress was slow. I saw the shadow of Dr. Stuttler making a similar effort. Time was an inconceivable notion in this dark, gelatinous realm. but it felt as though hours passed before we finally met. I struggled to breathe, exhausted from the action and the difficulty of inhaling the fluid. I saw Matthias almost clearly now. Upon seeing me, his face paled and contorted into a look of terror, like a wild animal in a cage. "Get us out of here!" he yelled as best he could, grabbing at my shoulders. I felt his fingers dig painfully into the flesh of my arms. "Prepare. Come," the voice in my head said. From the corner of my eye, I saw a massive shadow, gliding like a wraith through the green goo. Panic formed like a tempest in my mind. I desperately spun the object in my hands, looking for the indentation. The sphere was now smooth. It did not cut my hands, and I failed to find the slot. The shadow grew closer. "What's taking so long?" asked Matthias. He was quivering. I wondered if he had seen the giant thing making its way toward us. "I don't know. I can't get the device to activate," I replied. Rumbles vibrated through the fluid. Matthias wrapped his arms around me. I could feel his pot belly press into my gut. "Please, Victor, I don't want to be here anymore," he pleaded. His voice was almost drowned out by the tremors. "I can't! It's not working!" The rumbling stopped. The shadow ceased its gliding. I could just make out its shape, bulbous with long appendages extending from the top of what I imagined was its head. Small tendrils writhed lazily around the point of the bulb. It was enormous. This brief glance kicked my panic into overdrive. I froze in fear. Matthias noticed that I had stopped fiddling with the sphere. "Fern?" he asked. A slight pain erupted on the skin of my midriff as he said my name. Shwick! The sound followed pain. I looked down. A bony, blood-covered spike jabbed gingerly at the flesh of my gut. I scanned its length with my eyes. Stark white barbs stained yellow and brown, deep purple tentacles surrounded by a pocket of red that muddied the green slime, and curls of Matthias' intestines poking through a hole in his abdomen. "I just want to go home," he said. His arms went limp. The tentacle retracted. Its barbs dug into his fat, and Matthias howled as the tentacle pulled tight and flicked him away into the haze beyond my vision. His body streaked blood, a swath of red amongst the green. Merry Christmas. The thought popped into my head of macabre fashion without a hint of humor. No doubt a coping mechanism spurred on by this grim experience. I braced for inevitable death. To my great surprise, the creature's tentacles remained a distance away from me despite their whipping and thrashing atop long, segmented insectoid limbs. The moment of silence felt like it spanned an eternity, and then the fluid vibrated. The intense rumbling buffeted me so harshly that I thought it would shake my bones into jelly and melt my body into the surrounding liquid. "Speak," said the thing. It sounded like a mixture between gargling and a jackhammer's pounding. I gasped at the realization that this being was not a mindless killing beast, but instead sentient, and it talked with a rudimentary form of English. Scientific curiosity overrode my initial despair at the horrific experience in this alien realm. "What are you?" I asked. As the words traveled through the sludge, a foreign presence probed at my mind. I did not resist. Fascination replaced my fear. "Ah," it said, "I have tasted your tongue. I am the Moonin, and you are the Fern.
My chosen.
Why did you kill Stuttler? I asked, although my concern drifted far from the fate of Matthias. A sense of moral obligation compelled the question.
Kill? No. The Stuttler has been sent to the transitory state. I presume this is what your kind mistakenly view as end. He is not my chosen, the Fern. His continuation in that form was unwelcome.
What do you mean by chosen?
The Fern. You are to be my void jumper.
Void jumper?
I remember your kind being inquisitive. You are not here to query, and I am not here to answer.
But there is so much for me to ask. How did you bring me here? Why was I chosen? How do I get back?
Bah! Enough. Go, and perhaps I will answer when you return.
Go? What do you mean, go? I'm stuck in this fluid. The creature refused to answer. I felt the sphere spin in my hand, scraping and drawing blood. The needle again drilled its way through my arm. My body contorted and stretched. Blinding light emanated from the sphere, replaced by black. I shifted into a different place, jumped, if you will. I opened my eyes to unfamiliar surroundings. I was lying on my back in a field of plants. They were blue, thin as a wisp, and incredibly tall. They swayed as if buffeted by wind, but I felt no breeze. I looked up past their thin stalks. Bright sky met my gaze, but I perceived no discernible source of light. I pushed myself up onto my feet. The spongy, dry ground gave a little when I pressed my hand into it. It felt like moss, but was pale violet speckled with black. Sound was absent, and in its place existed unnerving silence. I tried to look for anything of note, but the blue grass blocked most of my view, so I picked a direction and started moving. Plants gave way to the pressing of my hand in an eerie flutter. Touch offered no sensation to my skin. The ground made progress laborious. Each step was like walking on a soft foam pad. I struggled to retain my balance. My feeble scientist body succumbed to the effort. I had spent long hours poring over data at my desk and subjecting relics to various tests. Sadly, my work left little room for physical endeavor, and over the years I lost my shape. I sat down on the spongy earth to take a rest. As I sat, I pondered. Why had that monstrosity sent me here? What goal could it have? However, the desire to get back pressed more urgently on my mind. Not back to the fluid-filled world of that massive, deadly creature, but back to my lab, to my research. I had not envisioned this occurring when I first started examining the sphere. Yes, the possibility of discovery exhilarated me. I was seeing things that most men could never dream of. But I longed for the comfort of a good recliner sat in front of a roaring fire and a strong cup of tea. I laid back on the exceedingly comfortable ground and felt my senses fade away, drowsy from the effort of walking and the physical toil of bridging the gap in the void. I stirred from the sound of buzzing. It was a quiet sound, but in the absolute silence of this world, it was near deafening. I pulled myself upright and listened to discern the sound's location. It came from the expanse above the blue plants. I looked up and felt instant revulsion at the creature there. The bloated being floated above, feeding on the stalks of grass. It looked an asymmetrical balloon of sorts, large and covered with a pulsating venous mesh. Bulges of pale red thin flesh protruded from between the network of fibers. A bundle of pinching appendages extended down from where it floated. They grabbed at the blue stalks, shoving severed matter into a small gash at the bottom of the thing. The closest being on Earth that approximated its appearance was the man-o'-war jellyfish. This monster, though, incorporated few conventions of a living thing. It hummed as it went about grazing. Then it stopped moving, making noise, and eating. It stopped right over me, the clawed arms just out of reach of my head. I felt anxious, thinking that this horror had perceived me in whatever unknown manner it could sense things. I muffled my breathing, but panic and adrenaline were forcing me to intake air at an unreasonably loud rate. One of its pincers extended down and clacked in the vacancy above my hair. I recoiled reflexively from its grasping action. Suddenly, a different creature jumped from the grass. I only saw its lengthy body for a moment. Many short, spindly legs splayed out from its body, and a pointy proboscis protruded from its head. The spike punctured the bloated sack of the floating thing. Gases hissed out of the hole, and a luminescent fluid spattered the grass. Both creatures collapsed in the growth beyond my vision. The windbag buzzed in agony as sounds of slurping and struggling drifted through the tall grass. I backed away from the wrestling of the immense grotesque creatures, my mind envisioning the gore and what was sure to happen if the long monstrosity turned its attention to my fragile human organs. I staggered over the squishy ground and fell. The sound echoed nearly inaudibly, but it proved enough. The slurping ceased. In an instant, it skittered toward me. It looked like a demonic millipede. Innumerable legs tipped by pincers grasped gingerly at the blue stalks and propelled it at intense speeds. I rolled to the side and felt a slight breeze as it soared past me. The point of its mouth neatly gouged a groove through the tender flesh of my shoulder. It screeched and spun its head to face me. The smooth shell held no eyes, no antennae, no sensory organs at all as far as I could tell, just a frantically lunging needle. I continued rolling until I slid under its slithering body. Without weapon or tool, and with survival instincts kicking in, I punched at the pale gray underside of the thing. To my astonishment, the blow burst through the creature, showering me in a cascade of glowing chunks and dark brown liquid. The liquid bubbled and hissed on my skin, causing blisters to form. Throes of desperation overshadowed my pain. I grabbed at a group of the limbs. They tore easily in my hands, so I thrust them aside and pushed at the underbelly of the beast. This time the creature did not fully erupt into fountains of damage. Instead, I tossed it into the sky above, the weight of the creature lighter than a handful of sand. I realized the weakness of this realm. Everything here lacked density. Even a weakling like me was essentially a strong man. I waited for the body of the thing to impact the ground and brought my arms down, sphere clasped between my hands. The domed carapace of the monster cracked and crumpled under my fists. A length of the creature severed from the front. Its proboscis let out a shrill whistle, but I must have hit something vital, because the rest of it collapsed too. The whistle fizzled to a muffled gurgle. I breathed a sigh of relief, and then something struck me in the thigh. I heard another different sort of hissing. I looked down, and to my horror, another proboscis skewered my leg. It pierced clean through and sucked at the air on the other side. I shook my leg, and the appendage snapped like a brittle twig. I spun toward the creature as it gargled through the broken tube. Screeching issued from all sides of me. I swiveled slowly, and saw that a dozen more of the millipede monsters surrounded me. 1? Easy, but 12? Even my immense fortitude in this world could not contend with such a number. However, I ripped the tapered appendage from my leg with my free hand and stood my ground, ready to take as many of these beasts with me as I could. The heads of the millipede beasts closed in on me with predatory intent. The orb spun again. The creatures recoiled as I twisted on the sponge-like earth. The millipedes, grass, and earth vanished, and I returned to the abyss between worlds. This time, I heard a voice. Not the voice of Vermoonen, tinged with putrid venom and intriguing manipulation. This voice rang with a heavenly chime. It sounded sweet and gentle, like the pitter-patter of rain on a steel roof. I struggled to understand its gibberish, but it still filled me with comfort. The voice faded and I appeared somewhere else. And by somewhere else I mean some incomprehensible plane of existence. Shapes, colors, and sounds filled my senses, but I fought to distinguish them from each other. I moved and heard sound. I spoke and saw shapes. I thought, and my head spun in dizzying chaos. Nothing made sense, so I stopped trying. My consciousness regrouped, and for a moment I could understand the nonsense. But soon that knowledge faded away like a lost dream. I saw myself dissolve into a puddle and watched the fluid grow into a cluster of cells, a fetus, then a baby, a child, a teenager, an adult, and eventually a curmudgeonly scientist. I assumed this would end the vision, but instead the legs burst out from under this image, and its shape bloated into an obscene splatter of skin and flesh. Pressure threatened to burst my skull. Was it my own skull, or the skull of the image? The spummed in my hand began to regorant, and my pund felled the camp of Remoran. I triangled wide Satorn tar mid-thuck carp. Tum niddle round Mikhumi rarg und orp into mind arm, and I re-entered the void. This time there was silence, but I felt the presence of some immaculate being watching, waiting for a response. I cried out for help, but the sphere sent me to a new destination. The void spat me into darkness. My eyes would not adjust. I couldn't see a thing. I moved in random direction and hit a warm, moist wall. Groping through the pitch black in the opposite direction, I found the same. I paused and ran my fingers along its length. Its surface felt like damp concrete, but as I probed, I discovered that it undulated slowly, like the heartbeat of a great slumbering god. I found an opening and entered it. The edges of the room were roughly the same. I ran through another opening, and soon another, and another. I was lost in some kind of breathing maze, like a blind rat looking for cheese. Something cold bumped against me.
What are you doing here? Who are you? What are you?
The cold thing asked. How? I asked. I was taken aback by its speaking to me.
What type of evil are you, foul demon? Why do you carry the heat of the labyrinth?
I cowered to the floor. I don't know. Please don't hurt me. I can't even see.
What queer deception is this? Another torment from the minions of orthodoxy to torture us? Well, I will not fall prey to the warmth of your falsehood. He started to shout. You hear that, you bastards? You shan't trick me.
I backed away from the thing. I heard it rush toward me. I opened my mouth to scream. Something that was not a hand clasped over my face. Its coldness almost burned through the sensitive flesh of my lips.
"Hush,"
he said.
"She approaches."
I heard clanking somewhere in front of me. It sounded like a rusty anchor being pulled across stone. I sat petrified. The appendage lingered on my lips until it became too frigid to bear. I gasped from the cold and pushed it away. The clanking noise stopped. Heat burned at my skin as something else rounded a corner into the room. It burned at everything above my waist. I crouched down below the barrier. My hands brushed over the figure of cold, and I realized that this creature was the one shielding me from this heat. Despite being able to speak my language, I could tell that its shape varied greatly from a human being.
"Run!"
he yelled. "Where? I can't see," I replied.
"Just go. Anywhere but toward the fire."
I ran in the opposite direction and battered myself directly into another wall. I rebounded and fell on my back, knocking the wind out of me. The heat grew stronger. Sweat dripped from my pores, but I couldn't get up.
"Come on, she-devil,"
shouted the cold man.
"I've been waiting for you, filthy warm blood. Go ahead. Give me your worst."
A loud thunk reverberated through the chamber.
"Is that all you've got?"
The man coughed. Freezing droplets spattered my head. The sound of retching filled my ears.
"I'll be damned if orthodoxy."
The figure of coldness slumped to the floor with a thud. Overwhelming heat filled the void that he left. I crawled away, but met another wall. My skin felt as though it were exposed to an open blast furnace. A feminine voice spoke over me. "You are not of the cold-blooded," she said. Fire licked at my cheek. Her voice crackled seductively. "No, I'm not. Please, leave me be," I said. The sphere spun in my hand. "Logic and orthodoxy dictates that you would die the same." The needle of the device wound its way down my arm. The clanking of a chain became unbearable. My body morphed into elongated shapes. The sound of rusty metal and the warmth of my unknown foe echoed away into nothingness. I heard words in the nothing. "Tel companitief, I wef au." I arrived in the dark green fluid of Vermunen's domain. His shadowy image glided through the gunk. He halted suddenly, hovering above me.
"Gone and injured yourself. We can't have that. The Fern must remain in superb health if he is to serve me properly,"
Vermunen said through the fleshy drums that indented his body. A cloudy white secretion flowed from tiny orifices on the monster's underside. The haze filled me with dread, and I tried to wiggle away.
"Do not resist, my chosen. Your wounds must be filled with my mercy."
The white enveloped me and relieved my pain. My boiled skin returned to its normal pallor, and the open gashes filled themselves with new flesh. As I was healed, I remembered what he had said before. "Will you answer my questions now?" I asked.
"Soon. But for now the Fern must report on his findings."
I felt the same probing as before affront my mind. Vermunen was reading my thoughts. I resisted, but his mental prowess violated the thin layers of my mind. He gripped my memories and ripped their duplicates away from me.
Good. My Void Jumper has learned much of the other worlds. but there is still infinite to be gleaned.
My mind spun. Infinite? Do you mean that I am stuck doing your bidding for the rest of eternity?
What a poor question to ask. Of course, you are mine. Now go.
Wait, that's not my question. I didn't mean to ask that. The void consumed me. I was transported to a land of rock and sand. Glass structures jutted from random locations among the cracked stones, an endless sea of grit. Their architecture rose in complex patterns and seemingly impossible angles. The white light of the sun refracted through the clear glass, causing a rainbow of shimmering patterns. It was breathtaking. I wondered what sort of being constructed such monuments. A great wind rushed from over the horizon and interrupted my imagination. A massive cloud of dust bore down on me. Within it, I heard the sound of the fragile glass shattering and crashing to the arid ground. I looked for some kind of shelter. Seeing an open crevice in a cracked boulder, I ran for cover. The storm hit me before I made it. Sand tore at my exposed skin and frayed holes in my clothing. I clamped my eyes shut against the abrasive maelstrom. Fortunately, my foot found the open gap in the rock. My leg dropped into the expanse and I tumbled, pummeling my already damaged body as I fell. I opened my eyes and looked up from the bottom of my sanctuary. It seemed I was relatively safe. Dust shot across the opening carried by the howling wind. Bright flashes of red light burst across the gap in the cracked rock, and explosive percussion pounded at my eardrums. Eventually the wind died down, although I could still hear concussions and something akin to a low roar. I chanced to peek at what was occurring outside, and climbed up the stone wall of my enclosure. It was dark, but the bursts of red light gave me glimpses of the tumultuous meteorological event. Massive vortexes of dust and loose stones swirled across the glass desert. A bolt of red lightning struck one of the tornadoes near me. I felt its electrical field pulse over my scabbed face. The loud crack hurt my ears. The vortex stopped spinning, and when the remaining dust settled, a glass structure spired up in its place. I dropped back into my hovel, waiting for the storm to pass. I conjectured about the feasibility of life on this world. Maintaining the possibility, I loathed the idea of meeting such a creature. Suddenly red filled my vision. Every hair on my body stood upright. A deafening boom echoed through the crevice and chunks of glass and rock showered over me. Fluid leaked from my right ear before I fell unconscious. When I awoke, I lay in the center of an oval-shaped room on a sort of hard mattress. I had shifted into another dimension. The walls of the room looked like smooth marble covered in splotchy polished rust. I tried to stand up, but an invisible elastic sheet held me down. It covered my entire body, allowing only a minimal amount of movement before the tension forced my limbs back into position. I noticed in dismay that the sphere wasn't in my hand. That vile orb was both simultaneously the instrument of my damnation and also my only way home. I needed to get it back. An unseen door slid open with a whoosh. Its sound only registered in my left ear. A new group of alien life forms entered. The creatures were gray and wrinkled globular masses of folded, flaking flesh. They moved by rolling, extending pseudopods of dry flesh. They tumbled over the floor clumsily. One of them pressed a secret button with the end of its false appendage. The invisible restraints dissolved and I could move again. The urge to flee or fight overwhelmed me. For all I knew, this mattress was actually a dinner table. I envisioned my corpse torn into bite-sized morsels by the gray pseudopods, showers of flaking skin flying about the room as they sated their ravenous appetites. The remnant of my rational mind, however, convinced me to take caution but reserve judgment. I knew very little about these beings, beyond the minor glimpse of their technological prowess, so I merely sat up slowly, watching for any reaction in these creatures. They stayed motionless. I noticed tiny pores dotting their bodies. Maybe these were their eyes. One of the things rolled closer to me. Its stench followed. The pungent scent was something like a cross between a skunk and crushed pine needles. It overwhelmed my nostrils. I recoiled, gagged, and pinched my nose closed with my fingers. The alien drew away slightly. I was astonished by its behavior. I observed no hostility, and they appeared as curious as I. "Sorry, I did not mean to offend," I said, steadying the shakiness in my voice and attempting to sound as polite as I could manage. "It's just that your smell is overpowering to me." The beings did not respond to my voice. They just sat there, still as statues. I pulled my hand away from my face. The thing closest to me emitted a different smell, similar to freshly baked bread, roses, and wet dirt. The others around him issued a variety of differing scents. It all swirled together into a mess of fragrance within my burning nostrils. It meant something, but its significance was lost to me, like trying to describe color to a man born blind. The aliens recognized this, and the odor faded away. The one closest to me extended a single pseudopod. Fear caused my musculature to contract. What is this thing going to do to me? The limb paused in front of me, and the creature waited. This was undoubtedly some kind of peaceful gesture. It patiently awaited the touch of my hand. I hesitated. I imagined the devastating effects that could occur at making physical contact with this being. His gray skin could be toxic, but then again, what did I have to lose? I moved my quaking hand into the waiting curve of the pseudopod. As our flesh made contact, images rushed into my mind. They flashed so quickly that I only glimpsed a few details. I saw a crystal-clear sea with the blob creatures darting through underwater structures, a sky full of purple shimmering stars and celestial bodies that hovered astonishingly near. I saw landscapes of gentle hills that defied logic, and vast forests of strange orb-shaped plants, their beaded structures twined with flowing pulses of pale blue in the center. I saw sprawling cities of domes and twisting spires. I tried my hardest to send images back. I thought of Earth, my lab, the Himalayas, New York City, Redwood National Park. And then I thought of dark green gel, Stuttler's death, and Vermoonen. The aliens' mental photographs took a dark turn. They showed me oceans turned to glass, a black abyss, charred plants, crumbling ruins with rotting corpses lining the streets, and the image of myself. This last picture lingered unlike the rapidly changing ones before. It reflected me like a mirror, and as I watched, my skin shrank away, fat dissolved, skin withered into a leathery covering before sloughing away in sheets of decomposing putrescence. My hair, nails, and teeth fell out. Finally, my emaciated body collapsed into a heap of bones and dust. The pseudopod wriggled free from my grip. The creature rolled a few feet away from me. I felt as though what I had experienced was a deeply intimate encounter for these beings, but one tainted by the nature of my arrival here. The gray blob emitted a new smell, a vile fragrance that was familiar to me. It was the smell of Vermoonen's domain. The aliens again erupted into a plethora of different scents. My initial fear returned. I thought they were going to kill me now because of what I had shown. Instead, all the beings rolled back out of the room through the sliding door. It felt like hours before the door finally opened again. Only one alien passed through and approached me. I hopped off the side of the table opposite him and cowered behind it. The creature stopped moving, and a pseudopod stretched from his round center. A bulge appeared at the base of it and flowed through to the end. The tip of the pseudopod burst open and grasped in it the sphere. The blob motioned for me to take it and never return. I understood and reached out to grab the glistening orb. It spun the moment my fingers grazed its surface. I tried to rip it from the alien's grip, but I wasn't fast enough. The creature let out a smell of spoiled milk and formaldehyde. Its body shot quaking pseudopods in every direction. We melded together into a twisting conjunction of gray wrinkles and pale flesh. We entered the void. The voice came again, but it was far more intelligible this time. "You have friend. This can well help with the task at foot," it said with a pleasant lyrical quality. "Who are you?" I asked. The sound of my words vanished quickly into the nothing. "We am the between. You hear and do." "What? I don't understand." "Task upon us. You do help." "You have a task for me?" "Yes, but future. We gather the boon. Time, wait, endure." I heard this last cryptic message before we displaced beings were thrust from the abyss. Please not for Moonin, I thought, remembering his reaction to the late Matthias. Relief filled my lungs. Air did too. I laid on the metal grate of a catwalk. The sound of machinery echoed through the dimly lit expanse. An oily substance covered everything. I grabbed at the slippery iron railing and stood up. Rows of pistons, gears, and unfathomable mechanical contraptions lined the catwalk. A few yards away stood the alien that I had unwillingly ripped from his world. I felt empathy for the creature, but I couldn't help him now. I didn't even know how to get myself back to Earth. How would I be able to get this blob back to his world? In a strange, selfish way, I was glad he was here. At least I had company. My footfalls clanged, echoing among the machines as I walked toward the wrinkly creature. A smooth rail ran above the catwalk. The alien was in a state of panic. Pseudopods flailed about him, striking metal, and the same formaldehyde scent as before fogged the air around him. I tried to catch one of the many tendrils, but they flailed wildly. I covered my face, braved their assault, and pressed on toward his center mass. The pseudopods smacked at me, bruising my arms, legs, and torso. When I waded through, I pressed my hand onto the being. I sent him images of his home. This did the trick. His flailing slowed and stopped. I sent a picture of the orb in my hand in contact with him. He received the message because when I pulled my arm away, he grabbed my hand with a false appendage. We moved along the catwalk, hand in pseudopod like the oddest duo in any reality. A whizzing sound emanated from far off in the darkness. A little cubical device rushed along the rail above us. I ducked to avoid it and reflexively looked at the metal box. It stopped and came back toward us slowly. I saw that it was a machine of some sort, attached to the rail with a wheeled coupling. A separate mechanism rotated vertically in the center. The machine's black lens honed in on us. It emitted a few clicks and a pulse of bright white light. Then it continued on its way above the catwalk. I stared until it vanished from my sight. A sensation of dread coiled around my spine and caused my skin to ripple into goosebumps. The pseudopod beckoned me forward, however, so I kept moving. The array of suspended walkways seemed to lead nowhere. They branched and forked, but never ended, and distant machines perpetually shifted, banging and grinding toward an unknown goal. Another whirring sound came from the overhead railing. A long metal rod with a hook on the end adjusted on a hinge and careened toward us. Like some devilish crane game, it swung down at my friend the blob. The sharp point of the greasy hook impaled the alien and lifted him from the catwalk. I held on, but the pseudopod slipped from my grip, pulling me sprawling across the oily grate. He was dragged away, the smell of bleach trailing toward the distant mechanical structures. There was nothing I could do. I continued forward. The sound of machines grew louder, and it seemed I was approaching the crux of this place. Then a hook came for me. I ran, but it was fast. It bore down behind me, its hinge adjusting to the proper height and position. In panicked brilliance, I hopped the railing and clung off the side of the slick walkway. With a whoosh, the hook sailed over me. When it passed, I tried to climb back over the railing. I moved up a bit, but the grease slowed my progress. I cursed the uselessness of my left hand, but I couldn't drop my only method of escaping. I swung my elbow over the second rung and stretched my fingers to the last metal tube. As I pulled myself up, my hand slipped free. I fell. My hips collided with another rail below. Pain emanated from the impact, but my descent continued. I dropped to a chain-linked flooring and lost consciousness. Agony drew me back to reality. My hip throbbed. I saw a river of molten metal flowing below me. I tried to get up, but my legs remained limp. The orb had fallen a few feet away. I had to get to it and flee. As much as I loathed seeing Vermoonen again, I needed his healing. I gritted my teeth, plunged my fingers through the metal links under me, and began to drag my body toward the sphere. I heard the sound of clanking coming from somewhere out of sight. Whatever it was moving closer. I crawled as fast as I could. My hips screamed as it dragged behind me. I clawed at the sphere just beyond my reach. I heard the sound of the thing nearly upon me. With one last burst of excruciating effort, I yanked myself within snatching distance of Vermoonen's metal device. Iron mandibles lifted my body as I snagged the sphere with my right hand. My eyes turned to the thing. The machine held me in 2 of 3 arms tipped with vices. It towered over me. Black lenses spun atop its imposing metallic hulk. It clambered around on 5 legs, spread for stability on the flexing floor. I ran my hands over the sphere, hoping to activate it, and that its effects would not encompass this automaton. Nothing happened. The robot carried my pain-racked body to the underside of another rail. Something whirred on the track out of my vision, but I knew what it was. The mechanical being swung me onto the meat hook, stabbing it through my shoulder. Like a cow carcass in a slaughterhouse, the hook carried me to my doom. My mind threatened to lose consciousness from the torment of my shoulder and the swinging of my shattered hip. By sheer will, I managed to keep a solid hold on the sphere. The hook dragged me across a vast distance of open chambers between moving machines. I entered a narrow corridor. Saw blades mounted on hinged arms. Thin drills and intricate mechanisms covered the walls. The hook slowed its forward momentum. I basked in a short-lived second of relief from the constant swinging and swaying that exacerbated my wounds. A needle stabbing my neck interrupted my respite. I was injected with something cold, and my pain began to fade. The saw blades spun, adjusting themselves to the hook's path. I almost wanted to wriggle free, but euphoria superseded any desire for escape. I barely felt the blades cut off my legs at the top of the hip. My severed appendages dropped through the open expanse below the hull and burned in a river of glowing iron. Before my guts could slide out of the gaping hole, a set of 5 hydraulic legs pressed into place. Screws forced their way into vertebrae and what remained of my hip. Cables shoved into my nerves. The hook pulled me forward. Metallic straps pinned my head in place. A narrow drill positioned itself in front of my face and whirred. It plunged through my left eye, turning ocular tissue into gelatin and eradicating its ability to see. A black lens with a backing of sharp wires was shoved into the mangled remnants of my eye socket. The wires wound their way through the base of my skull. A fuzzy tan hue restored my lost vision. A pincer that looked like a pair of garden shears neatly lopped off my left arm just above my elbow. A new metallic arm clamped into place and bolts burrowed through the bones. Just as another pair of shears was about to sever my right arm, the sphere spun and glowed bright. It ripped me from the mechanical world and into the void. Silence perpetuated the darkness. My new mechanical eye provided a benefit. In the darkness, I saw lights all around. They flitted about in a frenzy of activity, pausing when their glow met another. "Hello?" I muttered to no response. The drugs still dulled my senses. The lights scurried through the enveloping emptiness, ignoring my calling. "I know you're there. I can see you." One of the entities soared over to me. Brightness covered my robotic monocle. "Won't have that," it mumbled in that same heavenly voice. A red triangle flickered over my vision. I felt a pressure develop in my left eye socket. Static fizzled across my sight like a television with bad reception. I heard cracking before the sphere whisked me away. Vermoonen summoned me back into his realm. The static in my new eye dwindled, but now hairline fractures webbed across the lens. What were those things trying to hide from me? I surveyed the green fluid for the unmistakable silhouette of Vermoonen. I saw nothing yet. Those beings of light, they seemed like angels, but why did they not answer? Are they truly the allies I had hoped? The approach of Vermoonen, gliding through the foggy sludge, cut my thoughts short.
"Ah, my chosen returns. What treasures has the Fern brought for me?"
He vibrated. His thoughts penetrated the thin barrier of my mind and stole my memories.
The Void Jumper seems to have acquired a few gifts. How interesting,
he said through his vocal drums. A bladed tentacle swooped at me with terrifying dexterity. Sparks sputtered and steadily winked out, suffocated by the viscous fluid. I forced my neck to strain downward and saw that Vermoonen's slithering appendage had wrapped itself around one of the mechanical legs. It pulled the detached limb toward its shadowy owner.
"Thanks. You shan't need all 5.
"Please, can I go?" I started to ask. I wanted to go home, but how could I? I was literally half the man I used to be.
"A question? You have earned as much. Ask,"
said Vermoonen. I thought carefully about my next words. I dreaded wasting another question on an accidental slip of the tongue. "What are you?" I asked in imitation of the first words I had spoken to him. His massive body quivered in response.
"I am beyond your primitive understanding, but I will try to place the words in a configuration that you may grasp, if ever so slightly. I am the moonless night, the purveyor of peace among worlds. I am your savior and master, the fire that burns unhindered. I am the essence of existence, the shadow that haunts the dreams of mortals. I am the Moonin.
His cryptic answer angered me. I wanted to know the nature of his being, not a bunch of analogous drivel. What a poor answer, I jeered impetuously. His limbs swung about in aggravation.
Bah! Very well. Let me show you,
he replied. His mind overcame mine. The very quintessence of his reality flooded my thoughts. It was too much. In self-preservation, my mind buried the recall. Whatever he showed left me broken.
Satisfied. Now let my healing bolster the Fern's vigor for the next. I cannot fix the metal, but the flesh shall be renewed.
I had forgotten about my damages. My skin ached from the abrasive sands. My body was bruised, my ear deaf, and the sights of robotic intrusion were raw. Vermoonen issued his white healing wave, and I felt all my wounds disappear.
Go now, and pray that you do not offend me a second time.
Minor pain racked my body as I contorted into the void. I was used to it by now. I entered into the darkness, hoping that the light would not destroy the mechanical half of my sight. I immediately heard the voice. "Stop. You mayn't see. Close." "I can't," I said. "My eye is open without consent." I saw the lights again. Still they were shifting about amongst themselves. "Not time. Not. Don't peer about. One way, only way. Turn and destroy. Turn equals death to I." I barely understood, but kept my head still despite wanting to curiously view their machinations. They didn't understand that I couldn't fathom what they were doing. Before long, the orb transported me to a new location. Massive, dull yellow spikes, like smooth trees without limb or leaf, populated this new world. I fumbled on my replaced legs like a newborn, just discovering its ability to control the strange growths that surrounded its body. And like an infant, I learned to crawl before I could walk. I pulled my forelegs behind me as I slid across black dirt below. Tiny mammalian creatures scurried around, fleeing my approach. They looked like small headless mice, but hopped about on a single relatively large limb with two long hooked claws, like one-legged kangaroos. Oddly, my robotic eye marked each one with a red triangle. After a mile or so, I hobbled on my iron legs, and soon I walked. My mechanical parts felt no fatigue, but the human bits still cried out with exhaustion. I leaned against one of the spikes. My remaining eyelid grew heavy. I jolted awake. My robotic legs spasmed under me. I collided with the black dirt. Hundreds of red triangles spotted the ground. I couldn't make out what lay below. I pulled myself up and waited. My normal eye saw nothing stirring on the surface. "Agu pichu milak done temaru," called a high-pitched voice. It came from one of those mice creatures sitting in a tunnel within the limbless tree. I poked a metal pincer finger at the thing. It scrambled away out of the reach of my digit. Kangaroo mice burst from under the dirt. They moved as a unit toward me. I focused my attention on the multitudes gathering at my feet. "Malahu gamadurku," sang the one in the yellow spike. It scurried up my arm and hopped onto my face. A suction cup adhered to the bridge of my nose. At this beckoning, the horde pounced. They hopped deftly up my robotic legs and attached to any exposed flesh. The headless one-legged mice covered me, coating my body with a pungent spray of tacky fluid. I tried to shake them loose, but the suction cups held fast. Minuscule scraping apertures carved tiny gouges at the center of each suction cup. I crashed through the mock forest, purposefully slamming into the hard spiked structures. The creatures burst upon impact with any surface. They exploded, sending a splatter of viridian stringy entrails flying, but the mouth parts remained stuck to my body. I ran into a clearing and stopped thrashing about. I saw no more of the creatures around me, so I brushed the suction cups off my skin with my metal vice hand. It was tough work. I lacerated my skin with the pincher a few times, but eventually I scraped off all the suckers. I rested and surveyed this clearing. Yellow rocks covered most of the black beneath, and massive holes, roughly the same diameter as the spikes, pitted the ground. A few pockmarked trees remained rooted in the clearing. Without the height of the spikes obscuring them, I noticed that the holes were organized in a complex geometric pattern. On Earth, this indicated an unnatural origin. But here, who knew? A peculiar thought popped into my head. I was not hungry or thirsty, nor did I have to relieve myself. Not that I could relieve myself any more, given the mechanical assembly that now served as my legs, but still I found it odd. I had no grasp of time, but surely a substantial length had passed. Yet my stomach begged not for subsistence. I thought of the green fluid. Perhaps it not only served as air, but also as food and hydration. A loud cracking sound interrupted my pondering. All around the clearing's border, fractures appeared on the surface of the golden trees. They broke open in a shower of rocks. Massive serpent creatures emerged. The trees were not trees at all. They were eggs. The serpents coiled on the ground. Like the mouse monsters, they possessed no heads. Smooth, iridescent skin covered their length. Circular indentations and wide, colorful fans interrupted the sheen. The fans fluttered and stretched against the dirt. "Kaniwila! Pichu Amaderku!" came a shrill screeching. I turned to see that another group of the headless mice had hopped upon one of the serpents. It writhed around, smashing legions of the things, but more swept over it. Its wriggling slowed until it stopped moving. The other serpents spun in spirals. Their fans spread out, and they gently rose off the ground and into the sky. I watched in awe at the flight of these shining behemoths, until a group of the jumping mice came toward me. "Malahug Milak!" screamed the one nearest me. I outpaced them easily. Soon the sphere drained my blood to draw me into the void. The glowing beings waited for me. The light surrounded me. Red triangles blinked on and off insistently. It was disorienting to see only tan-tinged beings marked by red in one eye and absolute darkness in the other. "We am ready. Boon is set. Steady for resolve. It pain," said the voice. They began. I had grown used to pain. The transportation process was excruciating. The worlds that I visited were fraught with dangers, and my mechanical parts still gave me a constant aching sensation. But this process tormented me unlike anything else. Every nerve in my body cried out like I was on fire. Tendons and muscles shredded. Bones cracked and my skin split. The sphere jammed itself into my wrist, separating my radius from the ulna. New tissue grew over it, making it a part of me. My fingers stretched into nimble claws. My arm grew longer and thinner. My rib cage burst open, and the bones fused together in a new lattice around my internal organs. Flesh extended over the robotic parts, melding them further into my organic anatomy. My neck broadened and compressed downward onto my shoulders. The only thing untouched by the transformation was my head, a shred of humanity amongst the alien monstrosity I had become. I tried to ask what they had done to me and why, but the orb whisked me off as soon as the manipulation of my body structure finished. I stood in a tiny prismatic chamber. Dark and reflective surfaces surrounded me. It felt like being in a house of mirrors. I saw what I had become. Millions of me reflected infinitely upon the walls, floors, and ceilings. 5 mechanical legs, 1 a severed fray of wires and steel. Tendrils of skin grown over the metallic hips. A twisted, bulging torso, spine canted at an obscene angle like an extreme case of scoliosis. 1 robotic appendage tipped with a pincer grip. Flesh encasing the upper tubes and pistons. My slender arm bulged at the shoulder and wrist, with stretch marks running down its entire length. I held up the hand of a predator, thin fingers with stark white bones spiked out of their tips. My face, normal but for the black lens where my eye had been, sat shocked on a thick corded neck. My mouth widened into a scream. I threw myself at the glass, hoping to destroy the reflected image. I bounced off the mirror. The entire chamber began to spin. I tumbled around the prism like a rag doll. The back of my head collided with the solid glass and I blacked out. When I awoke, I found myself prone on a dry, papery floor. A flaky cardboard material composed the hallway. It was dark red, almost to the point of brown. Glowing bulbous growths poked randomly through the winding walls and ceiling, providing the sole source of illumination. The hall looked like a natural formation, rather than the work of something sentient. My 4 legs easily righted my torso, but one of them quivered and stuttered when I tried to move it. Dark purple bruises lumped about my body. Half of my mind argued to just stay still and wait for the orb to take me away. An ominous feeling pervaded this place, a sense of being an unholy intruder at some sacred site. But I decided to press onward. What did I have to lose? My life? I didn't even know if I was human anymore. I unwillingly served the directive of Vermoonen. I was a slave, and I didn't care. I picked a direction and started walking. The hallway wound for miles as it slowly widened. I heard a sound echoing down the hall. It sounded like scratching. I pressed one side of my metal hand to the wall and ran it across the length. The sound I made was similar. Something lay in wait down there. I kept moving, but stopped when I saw a shadow in the path beyond. The flicker of a spastic red triangle appeared on my synthetic eye before the whole construct winked out. I stood still. The darkness taunted my human eye, but I saw something cloaked in a shimmering aura. Its silhouette cast a blatant figure on the tunnel wall. It burst out of the darkness and clambered toward me. Its mouth writhed with a dozen long black mandibles. It propelled itself by 4 scythes atop insect limbs. I almost laughed as it struck out with one of these blades. I caught the limb with my robotic vice and reciprocated with the claws on my hand. My bone spikes caught it square in the teeth. A clear fluid floated up from its wound and stained the paper ceiling. Severed mandibles squirmed on the floor. It tried to back away, and I ripped the scythe out of its socket. The creature fled back the way it had come, and I followed. Soon, the hall opened into a wide circular room, and I saw the cause of the scratching noise. The floor was covered with sunken triangular cells, each holding a wriggling larvae. Their 3 tiny arms scraped at the corners of their depressions. A multitude of paper bridges led to a central island. A huge sculpture of Vermunin sat erect and nearly completed. I counted 14 maggot creatures in a ring around the statue, their scythes crossed and lifted up toward the image of Vermunin. 2 similar beings hovered near the top, expelling red pulp out of their mouths to put the finishing touches on the sculpture. Instead of scythes, 4 rounded points surrounded their drooping girths. A reckless, insane idea popped into my mind upon seeing the statue. I walked onto the bridge and held my long arm aloft, letting the creatures see the bulge of the sphere in my wrist. "Hail Vermunin!" I shouted. The 2 sculptors ignored me and continued their work, but the ones in the circle turned toward me. I walked over the bridge. The dark orange maggots parted to let me through, and I stood at the base of the structure, astonished that my plan had worked. And then a swish rang through the air. Something thudded to the ground next to me. A fountain of my own blood washed over me. I pulled the stub of my arm to my chest and clamped down on the end of it with my iron pincer. Rage consumed me. I was tired of being assaulted by the denizens of these strange worlds. The sphere laid there in the wrist of my clawed hand on the platform, completely and utterly useless to me. I had no way to transport out of this place. Static flickered over the darkness of my mechanical eye. I was tired of being Vermunin's pawn. My chest swelled. I was sick of losing myself to the decay of my personhood. Hatred burned in my heart. I shrieked, not in pain, but in excruciating defiance. Energy pulsed from within the confines of my gut. The statue and platform disintegrated. The wave of energy hurled the maggot things away, obliterated the larvae and their cells, and the entirety of this realm dissolved into nothing. It was like a bomb had gone off. All that remained was me, my severed arm, and darkness. My eye winked back on, and I saw the entities of the between appear and swarm toward me. They, or it, said nothing. One of them pushed my arm back into place, the flesh and bone mended together. "Good. No. Now more. Boon the Moonin," said the voice after my arm had been reattached. "What happened? What did you do to me?" I screamed. The orb spun under my skin, and its needle dug through the length of my malformed arm before I could get an answer. I entered. More void? The glowing things pranced around me. "Answer me," I said. The prancing stopped. "Boon the Moonin," said the voice. "What did you turn me into?" I insisted. "Boon the Moonin. Boon the Moonin. Boon the Moonin," the voice repeated. It sounded deeper and darker, no longer carrying an angelic quality. The beings continued chanting until I was pulled away into the dark green jelly. Vermunin once more glided toward me.
"The triumphant return of my champion, the Fern. Ah, you seem to have been altered. I look forward to delving into your new knowledge."
Vermunin's thoughts probed at mine, but his psychic tendrils ran into a wall around my mind.
"What is this? How can you resist? What are you?"
He sent through the undulating liquid. I thought I heard a hint of terror hidden among the ripples of his words. I am the moonless night, the purveyor of peace among worlds, your savior and master, the fire that burns unhindered, the shadow that haunts the dreams of deities. I am Victor Fern! My rage built, unbridled by fear. I thought of all the hardships I had endured for the sake of his scouting reports. I thought of the home that could never welcome me again. Prepare to enter the transitory state my kind knows as end, I shrieked. Energy radiated from my torso. The black lens of my eye shattered along the cracks. Vermoonen let out an anguished wail that barely echoed through my bones before the fluid sizzled away like phlegm on boiling pavement. Vermoonen, his flailing tentacles slashing at me in vain, gave way to the void, and he was no more. The voice of the abyss spoke.
You did it. You destroyed Vermoonen. I won't lie, I didn't think you had it in you, but I won. I finally won.
What? How are you speaking like that? I asked.
A ploy, Victor. I deceived you. I had to gain your trust somehow. You finites are so easy to fool, and such a fool you've been. I act the innocent part and you eat it up. For millennia I have battled that beast and always he has had the upper hand. You changed that. You changed everything. You will change everything. The universe and its multiple facets will turn to the spaces between. I will be everywhere. I will be everything.
I failed to find the words. This being was no better than Vermoonen. It believed me to be a tool, a means to nefarious ends.
What? No righteous rant? No witty retort? You sure had a lot to say to that tentacled freak, it said.
Fury boiled beneath my skin. Power surged in my gut.
Wait. What are you doing? Stop that! I'm warning you. Don't do what you're thinking. I can send you home. Just don't. Please, I'm begging you.
The pain of betrayal coursed within me. I thought the void being was my ally, my only friend through this tumultuous ordeal. The pulse emanated through me.
No!
cackled the being.
Did you really think that would work? You can't destroy the abyss.
I panted from my effort. So, what now? You've freed the slave into servitude, I said.
Now you go. Plunge existence into darkness.
The sphere spun. I woke at home on the couch. Darkness blanketed the window. Was it all just some disturbing nightmare? I closed my eyes, enjoying the comfort of familiar cushions. I longed to remain here, but the alarm clock in my room insisted that it was time to get up for the morning class. I stood up from the couch and was horrified to find 3 mechanical legs supporting me. I ran to the bathroom, hoping that this was just some kind of phantasmic symptom of the bad dream. I looked in the mirror and found a grotesque, transformed image. The energy consolidated in my gut. No, I said to my reflection. I remembered the intern that had willed himself to death. My robotic arm lifted up beside me. I looked at it and saw oxidization on the clamped surface. Sometime during my journey, the damn thing had rusted. Tears ran down the right side of my face. The energy welled within me. I didn't have long. I took my clawed hand and carefully scratched words onto the mirror. It read, "Don't touch." I placed the vice around my head. Maybe I am human after all, I thought, closing my iron fist. This has been Worlds Beyond and the Spaces Between, written and recorded for audiostories.com by Curtiss Christensen. Thanks for listening.